The Seoul skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, 1,000 lights flickering like distant stars against the darkness. Inside the penthouse, candlelight danced across polished mahogany, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe with the weight of unspoken threats. Armani lounged at the head of the table, his designer suit immaculate, his smile sharp as broken glass. He slid his wine glass across the smooth surface with deliberate carelessness, the crystal singing softly as it traveled toward the figure standing motionless near the wall. Another night, another servant, huh? His voice dripped with casual cruelty. What do you think of my little army of helpers, Gwan? Destiny's fingers tightened imperceptibly around the wine bottle she held. She kept her eyes down, her breathing measured, invisible in the way all servants learn to be. Across from Armani, Gwan sat perfectly still, a study in controlled power. His gaze flickered to Destiny for just a heartbeat before returning to his host, cold and assessing. I think you see everything as property, Armani. That's your mistake. Freya laughed from her brother's side, the sound brittle and mocking. You're here to lecture us? How charming. Armani gestured lazily toward Destiny, his eyes never leaving Gwan's face. She's just a maid. You really think a man like you would waste his time on someone like her? The air shifted. Gwan leaned forward, and suddenly the room felt smaller, more dangerous. I'm not wasting time. Name your price, Armani. I'll take her. Time stopped. Destiny's breath caught in her throat. The bottle trembled slightly in her hands. Armani's smirk faltered, confusion and disbelief warring across his features. The maid? He laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're serious? She's nothing. Just a servant. Gwan's voice cut through the space between them like a blade, quiet, absolute, final. She's mine now. The words hung in the air, reshaping everything. The tension just broke like shattered glass, didn't it? That moment when Gwan claimed Destiny, when everything shifted in a single breath. If you're feeling that electricity, that pull to see where this dangerous dance leads, hit that subscribe button. Because what comes next? It gets deeper, more dangerous, more real. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Seoul? New York? Somewhere you're reading this alone at 2 a.m.? Unable to stop? I want to know. This story is just beginning. And trust me, you don't want to miss what Destiny chooses next. The mansion was quieter than Destiny had expected. Not the oppressive silence of Armani's estate, where every sound felt like a potential threat, but something different, a stillness that breathed, that waited. Her footsteps echoed softly against marble floors as she moved through corridors lined with art she couldn't name, past rooms she hadn't yet dared to explore. She found him in the living room, a vast space that seemed designed to hold the city itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Seoul like a living painting, the neon lights below pulsing and flickering in rhythms she was only beginning to understand. Gwan sat in a leather chair near the glass, his profile sharp against the glow, his expression carved from stone and shadow. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence with words or gesture. Yet somehow, she knew he was aware of every step she took, every breath she drew. Why me? The words escaped before she could stop them, soft enough that she could pretend they were meant only for herself. But they hung in the air between them, impossible to take back. Out of all the people, why did you choose me? For a long moment, he said nothing. The city lights reflected in his eyes, distant and unreachable. Because I see what others don't. His voice was calm, measured, but there was something beneath it, a current running deep, pulling at things unsaid. Destiny felt it tug at her, drawing her closer despite every instinct that screamed caution. What's that? She took another step, then another, until she stood just beyond the reach of his shadow. Gwan turned then, slowly, deliberately. His gaze found hers and held it, and in that moment she saw something flicker behind the carefully constructed walls, something that might have been recognition, or perhaps something more dangerous. You've got a quiet strength, the kind they try to break, but it stays hidden. His words were precise, chosen with care. I value that. A bitter laugh escaped her throat before she could swallow it. She shook her head, the absurdity of it all crashing over her like a wave. Strength? You think being here, like this, is strength? The question tasted like ash in her mouth. She'd been bought, traded, passed from one man's possession to another's like currency, like property. What strength could there possibly be in that? But Gwan's expression didn't change. If anything, his voice grew softer, more intimate, as though he were sharing a secret meant only for her. Endurance is strength. Survival. That's what makes you powerful. The words settled over her like a blanket, warm and suffocating all at once. Destiny searched his face, looking for the lie, for the manipulation she'd learned to expect from men like him. But his features remained unreadable, a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit together in any way that made sense. Silence stretched between them, thick and weighted with questions neither seemed ready to answer. The city pulsed beyond the windows, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in this tower high above its streets. She stepped closer, close enough now that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, close enough to see him as something more than the cold, calculated figure who'd claimed her like a prize. "And what do you get from this?" Her voice steadied, finding its footing on uncertain ground. "Taking me? Protecting me?" It was the question that had haunted her since that moment at Armani's table. Since Gwan had spoken those 3 words that changed everything. She needed to understand the why of it, the purpose behind the transaction. Men like him didn't act without reason, without calculating the returns on their investments. Gwan looked down, and for just a heartbeat, something shifted in his expression. A shadow passed over his features. Regret, perhaps, or memory, or some emotion she couldn't name. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against her chest. "I protect what's mine. I don't need anything else." The words should have felt possessive, should have reminded her of Armani's casual cruelty, his dismissive gestures. But they didn't. Instead, they felt like something else entirely. A promise, perhaps, or a confession wrapped in layers of meaning she didn't yet know how to unravel. Destiny stood there, caught between the man before her and the city behind him, between the life she'd known and whatever strange new existence awaited her in this place. She didn't know if she could trust him, didn't know if she should, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt something other than fear stirring in her chest. It might have been hope, or it might have been something far more dangerous. The city lights had dimmed to a softer glow when Destiny found herself unable to sleep. The mansion was too quiet, too vast, and every shadow seemed to hold questions she couldn't answer. She wandered through the corridors in bare feet, her silk robe borrowed from a closet full of things that didn't belong to her, or maybe did now. She wasn't sure anymore. She found Gwan on the rooftop terrace, a space she hadn't known existed. He stood at the edge, hands in his pockets, staring out at Seoul, spread below like a galaxy of earthbound stars. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat on the stone balustrade beside him. "Can't sleep either?" His voice was quiet, lacking the sharp edge it usually carried. Destiny approached slowly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool night air. "Too many thoughts. I know the feeling." He picked up the glass, swirled the amber liquid, but didn't drink. "This used to be my brother's favorite spot." The statement hung in the air, unexpected, personal. Destiny had never heard him mention family before. "Used to be?" she asked softly. Gwan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He died 5 years ago, caught in the crossfire of someone else's war." He took a slow sip. "He was nothing like me. Studied literature at university, wanted to be a professor, hated everything about this life." Destiny moved closer, drawn by the rawness in his voice. "What happened?" "I was building my territory, making enemies, making moves. I thought I was protecting him by keeping him separate from it all." Gwan's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Turns out having a brother was vulnerability enough. Armani's predecessor used him as leverage, killed him to send me a message." The confession settled between them like falling snow, quiet, cold, transformative. "That's why you claimed me," Destiny said, understanding crystallizing. "At the table. You weren't just taking something from Armani. You were making sure he couldn't do to me what was done to your brother." Gwan turned to face her fully, and in the dim light, she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not weakness exactly, but humanity, the careful mask slipping to reveal the man beneath. "I failed him by being too late, too arrogant to see the threat." His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "When I saw you in that room, invisible to everyone, I saw someone who would be discarded the moment you stopped being useful. Or worse, used as a weapon against someone who might care." "You didn't know me," Destiny said, her throat tight. "No. But I knew what it looked like when someone was surviving in a world designed to break them." He set down his glass with careful precision. "My brother survived for 3 days before they killed him. 3 days of hoping I would save him. I was too late then. I won't be too late again." Destiny reached out, her hand finding his on the cold stone. "You saved me, Gwan. You were right on time." He looked down at their joined hands, and something shifted in his expression, the fortress walls lowering just enough to let her see inside. "Maybe we saved each other," he said quietly. "You remind me why I built this empire in the first place. Not for power, for protection, for making sure the people who matter don't become casualties." They stood together in the Seoul night, two people finding connection in shared understanding of loss, survival, and the fierce determination to protect what remained. The alley reeked of rain-soaked concrete and something darker, rotting garbage, stale cigarette smoke, the metallic tang of desperation. Destiny's heels clicked against the pavement, each step echoing too loud in the narrow passage between buildings. She glanced over her shoulder for the third time in as many minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't be here. Gwan had made that clear without saying it outright, the boundaries of her new existence drawn in silence and careful observation. But the questions had become unbearable, clawing at her thoughts until sleep became impossible, and every moment of safety felt like a beautiful lie. "Destiny, wait." The voice cut through the darkness behind her, urgent and clipped. Evans emerged from the shadows, his movements quick and controlled, his expression carved from stone. Gwan's right-hand man had followed her. Of course he had. She'd been foolish to think she could slip away unnoticed. "What are you doing?" She didn't stop moving, her breath coming faster now. "I need answers. I can't keep being in the dark." The words tumbled out between gasps for air, raw and desperate. 3 days in Gwan's mansion had given her luxury but no clarity, comfort but no truth. She needed to understand what she'd been pulled into, what debts and vendettas connected her old life to this new one. Evans closed the distance between them, his hand reaching for her arm. "This isn't..." He froze. Destiny felt it too, the shift in the air, the way the shadows seemed to thicken and take shape. Her blood turned to ice. Choi stepped into the alley ahead of them, blocking the exit. Armani's enforcer moved with the confidence of a predator who'd already tasted blood, his bulk filling the narrow space. Behind him, 2 more shapes materialized, his men, silent and menacing. "Going somewhere, Maid?" The mockery in his voice was thick, deliberate. Choi's smile was all teeth and cruelty, the same expression she'd seen 100 times in Armani's estate. The expression that meant pain was coming, that someone was about to be reminded of their place in the hierarchy of power. Evans moved before she could process the threat. One moment he was beside her, the next he was between her and Choi, his posture shifting into something lethal and precise. "Back off, Choi." His voice dropped to a temperature that could freeze blood. "This isn't your fight." Choi laughed, the sound echoing off brick walls like broken glass. He cracked his knuckles slowly, deliberately, each pop punctuating the threat. "You're too late. This fight's been decided." The words barely left his mouth before Evans exploded into motion. It happened so fast, Destiny almost couldn't track it. Evans's first strike caught Choi in the throat, a precise blow that sent the bigger man stumbling backward, choking. One of Choi's men lunged from the left, but Evans pivoted, his elbow connecting with the man's temple with a sickening crack. The body crumpled. Choi recovered faster than Destiny expected, driving forward with raw power behind his fists. But Evans was liquid where Choi was stone, flowing around the attacks, redirecting momentum, turning the enforcer's strength against him. A knee to the solar plexus, an elbow to the spine, a sweep that sent Choi crashing to the wet pavement. The second guard tried to grab Evans from behind. Destiny's warning died in her throat as Evans twisted free, caught the man's arm, and used it as a lever to slam him face first into the brick wall. The sound was brutal, final. 6 seconds, maybe 7. 3 men down. Evans stood over Choi, breathing hard but controlled, his eyes scanning the alley for additional threats. Blood dripped from his knuckles, his or theirs. Destiny couldn't tell. Choi groaned on the ground, trying to push himself up, failing. Evans turned to her, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. His eyes found hers in the darkness, sharp and assessing. "Let's go." He scanned the alley once more, his body still coiled tight with readiness. "We've got what we need. Move." Destiny nodded, her legs finally remembering how to function. But as she stepped over Choi's sprawled form, something shifted inside her. The fear was still there, humming beneath her skin like electricity, but it was joined by something else, now a fierce, burning clarity. She'd spent years learning to be invisible, to survive by shrinking herself down until she barely existed. But standing in this alley, watching Evans fight for her without hesitation, she understood what Gwan had seen. Endurance, survival, strength. She wasn't just running anymore. She was moving forward, toward something she couldn't yet name but could finally begin to imagine. Evans's hand found her elbow, guiding her toward the street beyond. Behind them, Choi's labored breathing faded into the night. Ahead, the city lights beckoned, indifferent and eternal. Destiny followed Evans into the light, and with each step, she left a little more of her old self behind in that dark alley. Whatever came next, whatever violence or revelation waited in the shadows, she would face it with her eyes open. No more darkness. No more hiding. Not anymore. Your heart's still racing, isn't it? Evans just dismantled 3 men in 6 seconds. And Destiny, our Destiny, who started invisible, she's not running anymore. She's moving forward. If you're invested in this transformation, if you need to see her claim the power she's always had, subscribe. Seriously. Because this story doesn't just ask what if you were saved, it asks what if you saved yourself. Comment below. Team Gwan, or are you still suspicious? And where are you watching from? Let's build this community of people who believe in choosing your own freedom. The penthouse office occupied the highest floor of Gwan's tower, a space designed to command rather than comfort. Dark wood panels absorbed the afternoon light filtering through tinted windows, and the city below seemed like something conquered, laid out for inspection. Gwan sat behind a desk that could have doubled as a dining table, his attention fixed on documents spread before him like a general studying battle plans. Destiny stood at the threshold, her hand still resting on the polished brass handle. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that made her pulse quicken. She'd rehearsed this conversation in her mind a dozen times since returning from the alley. Since watching Evans dismantle Choi and his men with surgical precision, each version had felt inadequate, the words never quite capturing the magnitude of what she needed to say. But standing here now, watching Gwan's pen scratch across paper with measured strokes, she felt the rehearsed speeches dissolve. What remained was simpler, more honest, more terrifying. I can't keep living like this. Her voice cut through the silence, steady and clear. No tremor, no hesitation. I need to know where I stand. Gwan's pen paused mid-stroke. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the city beyond the glass, the distant whisper of traffic and life continuing far below. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her words with anything more than that brief stillness. When he finally spoke, his tone was casual, almost conversational, but underneath it ran something harder, sharper steel wrapped in silk. You stand exactly where I put you. You're mine now, and I won't let anyone take that from me. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through the careful composure she'd built. Destiny felt anger flare hot in her chest, burning away the last remnants of fear that had kept her docile, kept her waiting for permission to exist. She stepped forward, her footsteps deliberate against the hardwood. I'm not your property. Her voice sharpened, taking on an edge she'd never dared use in Armani's presence. You keep acting like I don't have a say in this. That got his attention. Gwan's eyes lifted from the documents, finding her across the expanse of his desk. His gaze was cold, she'd expected that, but not unkind. It was the contradiction that unsettled her most, the way he could look at her with such clinical detachment while simultaneously making her feel seen in ways she'd never experienced. You do have a say. He set down his pen with careful precision, giving her his full attention now. You can leave any time, but I won't let you walk away from this without a choice. The statement hung between them, dense with meaning she struggled to unpack. Destiny found herself moving closer, drawn by the need to understand, to decode the layers of intention in his words. The desk became a barrier and a border, marking the space between his world and whatever undefined territory she now occupied. Without a choice? She echoed the words, tasting them for truth or manipulation. What does that even mean, Gwan? You took me from Armani like I was a piece of furniture. You brought me here without asking what I wanted. And now you're telling me I have a choice? A muscle flickered in his jaw, the first crack in his composure. He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Would you have chosen to stay with Armani? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. His voice remained level, but something shifted in his expression. You think I don't know what he did to you? What he would have continued doing? Destiny's breath caught. She'd been careful, so careful, to hide the bruises, to erase any evidence of Armani's casual cruelty. The way he'd grip her arm too tightly when she served wine. The way his eyes followed her with predatory interest. The way Freya would laugh when Destiny flinched. How? I see everything, Destiny. Gwan's interruption was gentle but firm. That's how men like me survive. By seeing what others miss, what they're too arrogant or too comfortable to notice. He paused, and for the first time, something almost vulnerable flickered across his features. I saw you, not the uniform, not the role you played. You. The words threatened to undo something fundamental in her chest. Destiny pressed her palms against the desk, kneading the solid wood beneath her fingers to ground her, to remind her that this was real and happening, and not some fever dream born of exhaustion and fear. Then tell me the truth. Her voice came out softer now, trembling despite her best efforts. What are you asking of me, Gwan? What's your real reason for keeping me here? The question seemed to age him somehow, drawing lines of weariness around his eyes that hadn't been visible moments before. He stood slowly, moving around the desk with measured steps until only a few feet separated them, close enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, the way his breathing had deepened. When he spoke, his voice was low, serious, each word weighted with something that felt like confession. I'm asking you to trust me, that's all. Trust that I won't let anyone hurt you again, not while I'm alive. The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. Destiny felt the careful walls she'd built, the ones that had kept her surviving in Armani's world, that had taught her to anticipate violence and betrayal, begin to crack. Not shattering, not yet, but fracturing along invisible seams she hadn't known existed. She searched his face for the lie, for the angle, for whatever calculation made this worth his while. Men like Gwan didn't act from altruism. They didn't risk wars with rivals over servants who meant nothing. There had to be more, some hidden agenda that would eventually reveal itself and prove her cynicism justified. But looking at him now, seeing the way his expression had softened without losing its edge, the way he held himself perfectly still, as though afraid any movement might spook her, she couldn't find it, couldn't locate the manipulation in the shadows of his eyes. What she found instead was something far more dangerous. A promise. An offer. A doorway to something that terrified her precisely because she wanted it. You're not just protecting me, she said slowly, the realization forming as she spoke. You're asking me to choose this. To choose you. To choose a life I don't even know how to imagine. Gwan's expression didn't change, but she saw acknowledgement in the slight dip of his chin, the way his shoulders relaxed fractionally. Yes. One word. One syllable containing multitudes. Destiny closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it settle over her like snow. 3 days ago, she'd been invisible, inconsequential, a person-shaped absence moving through Armani's world. Now she stood in a penthouse office, being asked to make a choice that felt impossibly vast. Trust him. Trust that the violence she'd witnessed wasn't just different from Armani's but fundamentally opposite. Trust that protection could exist without possession, that being his didn't have to mean being owned. When she opened her eyes, Gwan was still watching her, patient and inexorable as stone. I don't know if I can, she whispered. Trust, I mean. I don't know if I remember how. Something softened in his expression then, a warmth bleeding through the calculated coldness. Then we'll start small. One choice at a time, one day at a time. He extended his hand between them, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. Starting now, stay or go. The choice is yours, Destiny. It always will be. She stared at his hand, at the scars across his knuckles, at the steady certainty in his posture. Behind him, Seoul glittered in the fading light, 1,000 possibilities spreading out like stars. Destiny thought about the alley, about Evans fighting without question or hesitation, about the way Gwan had looked at her across Armani's dinner table, seeing something no one else had bothered to notice. She thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she might become. Then, slowly, carefully, she placed her hand in his. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and gunpowder, an incongruous combination that seemed to capture everything about this moment. Destiny sat in the back of Gwan's car, but this time, she wasn't just a passenger. Tucked against her ribs was something Evans had given her before they left, a small recording device, and more importantly, information. You don't have to do this, Evans had said, his expression unreadable. Gwan would never ask it of you. I know, she'd replied, her voice steady. That's why I'm choosing to. Now, as the convoy rolled to a stop in the circular drive, Destiny felt her heart hammering not with fear, but with purpose. She'd spent 2 years learning every secret in Armani's household, every deal, every betrayal, every piece of leverage he thought was hidden. She'd been invisible, which meant she'd seen everything, and now she would use it. The men emerged first, creating their perimeter. When Evans opened her door, she stepped out in a simple black dress that announced neither victim nor victor. just a woman who knew exactly what she was worth. Gwan exited his vehicle with that unhurried grace, but when his eyes found hers, she saw the question there. She answered it with a slight nod. "Trust me." His expression shifted surprise, perhaps concern, but then something else. Pride. The estate's massive doors swung open. Armani and Freya stood at the top of the marble steps, dressed for confrontation, their faces masks of arrogance barely concealing fear. "So, you came to claim your prize?" Armani's sneer was practiced, but his voice held an edge. "I warned you, Gwan. You're making a mistake." Gwan moved forward, but before he could speak, Destiny stepped ahead of him. The movement was subtle but deliberate, and she felt the shift in energy as every eye turned to her. "No," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the drive. "The mistake was yours, Armani. And it started long before tonight." Armani's face contorted with confusion and rage. "The maid speaks? How? I'm not a maid anymore." Destiny pulled out the recording device, held it up for him to see. "But I was, for 2 years. 2 years of being invisible in your house while you discussed business you thought no servant would understand." She smiled, and it was sharp as broken glass. "You were wrong." The blood drained from Armani's face. "October 15th, 2023, Destiny continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You and Park Jin-woo discussed moving 40 million in laundered funds through the Busan shipping operation. I was pouring your wine. You never looked at me once." Freya's composure cracked. "You're lying. December 3rd. You met with the Yakuza representatives about the territory exchange in Gangnam. I served the coffee. You laughed about how the police commissioner was handled." Destiny took a step forward, ascending the first marble step. "March 8th. You and Freya planned to eliminate Judge Kim before he could rule on the Songpa development case. I was clearing the dinner plates." Armani's men shifted nervously. Even they could see the implications if she had this much information, if she documented everything. 2 years of evidence, Destiny said softly, dangerously. Every illegal deal, every bribe, every threat, every body. She looked directly at Armani, and for the first time in 2 years, she saw him truly see her. "I gave it all to Gwan. But more importantly, I gave copies to 5 different lawyers, each with instructions to release everything, if anything happens to me, or to him." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the city seemed to hold its breath. Choi emerged from the shadows then, bloodied but defiant. "You're too late. It's already done." But Destiny didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to face him with a calmness that came from knowing she held all the cards. "What's done, Choi? The contract with the Russians? I recorded that too. The weapons shipment through Incheon? That's already in prosecutor hands, though they don't know it yet." She tilted her head. "Or maybe you mean the attempt on Gwan's life you were planning for next week? The one you discussed in the security office while I was cleaning the hallway outside?" Choi's certainty faltered. Behind Destiny, she felt Gwan's presence, solid and supportive, but he let her lead, let her claim this moment. "It's never done, Choi." Destiny echoed Gwan's words from what felt like a lifetime ago. "Not until I say it is." That's when Armani made his mistake. He lunged forward, rage overriding calculation, reaching for Destiny with hands that had dealt violence so casually for so long. Evans moved, but Gwan was faster, positioning himself between Armani and Destiny. The fight exploded into motion. Gwan's men meeting Armani's forces with brutal efficiency. But this time, Destiny wasn't frozen at the edges. She saw one of Armani's men circling toward Gwan's blind side, saw the knife glinting in his hand. Without thinking, she grabbed the nearest object, a decorative stone from the balustrade, and hurled it with all her strength. It caught the man in the temple, sending him sprawling. Evans dispatched 2 more attackers with mechanical precision. The woman Destiny recognized from the mansion moved through the chaos like a dancer, each strike purposeful and devastating. And in the center of it all, Gwan fought with the calm of someone who'd already won, whose only goal was to finish what had been started. Choi tried to rise, to rejoin the fight, but Destiny moved before she could second-guess herself. She descended the steps, picked up the knife the fallen man had dropped, and pressed it to Choi's throat as he knelt, bleeding, on the marble. "Stay down," she said quietly. "This is over." Choi looked up at her, and she saw the moment he recognized what she'd become no longer invisible, no longer powerless, someone who had chosen to fight. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. Armani's men lay scattered across the drive, groaning or unconscious. Freya had retreated inside, her nerve finally breaking, and Armani himself knelt on the steps, held in place by two of Gwan's men, his empire crumbling around him. Gwan moved to Destiny's side, his presence warm and solid. He looked at her holding the knife to Choi's throat, and something like awe flickered across his features. "You can let him go," he said softly. "You've already won." Destiny held position for one more heartbeat, making sure Choi understood exactly how much had changed, then stepped back. The knife clattered on marble as she released it. She turned to Armani then, ascending the steps until she stood above him, the reversal complete. "It's over," she said, echoing what she'd told Choi. "Your claim on me, on anything I was or might have been, it ended the moment Gwan spoke at your table. But more than that, it ended the moment I chose to stop being invisible." Armani's face cycled through rage and disbelief. He looked at her, really looked at her, struggling to reconcile the servant with this woman who'd just systematically destroyed him. "You think you've won?" His voice cracked. "You think this changes anything?" Gwan moved to stand beside Destiny, their shoulders touching. When he spoke, his voice carried the finality of doors closing, chapters ending. She didn't just win, she chose to win. There's a difference. He looked at Armani one last time. "I took your business, but she took your power. Everything you built on the assumption that invisible people don't matter, she proved you wrong. That's a lesson you'll remember the rest of your life," Destiny added quietly. "And if you come near either of us again, if you even speak our names, what happened tonight will seem like mercy. Every secret I know becomes public. Every crime becomes evidence. Everything you are becomes nothing." The words should have sounded like a threat, but they came out as simple fact. A promise delivered without malice, only certainty. Gwan's hand found the small of Destiny's back. Not possessive, but present. "We're done here," he said. They walked back to the cars together, but this time, Destiny held her head high, not because she was being protected, but because she'd protected herself. Because she'd chosen not just to survive, but to fight, to matter. The convoy pulled away from the estate, leaving it behind in a wash of red taillights. Destiny watched it shrink in the rearview mirror, and this time, she felt no fear, no uncertainty, only the fierce satisfaction of someone who'd reclaimed her own story. "That was incredible," Evans said from the front seat, his tone carrying genuine respect. Destiny caught Gwan's eyes in the darkness of the car. He was smiling, really smiling with pride, and something deeper warming his expression. "You saved yourself," he said quietly, echoing his words from before. "But you also showed Armani exactly what he'd overlooked all those years. That's not just survival, that's revolution." Destiny's hand found his, their fingers interlacing with comfortable ease. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. "You gave me the space to be powerful. I chose to use it." His grip tightened, warm and certain, and full of promise. "Then let's see what else we can choose together." Gwan's hand found hers in the darkness of the car, his grip firm and warm and certain. "You saved yourself," he said quietly. "I just made sure you had the space to do it." The penthouse office felt different now, transformed by what had transpired beyond its walls. Dawn was breaking over Seoul, painting the city in shades of amber and rose, and the light filtering through the windows carried a quality of renewal, of pages turning. Destiny stood near those windows, her silhouette outlined against the awakening metropolis, watching as the world below stirred to life. Behind her, Gwan's desk held the evidence of their victory documents detailing the collapse of Armani's operations, contracts broken, alliances severed, the careful dismantling of an empire built on cruelty and control. Evans had delivered the final reports an hour ago, his expression betraying nothing but the faintest satisfaction in a job completed with precision. Armani and Freya were finished. Not destroyed, Gwan wasn't that crude but neutered, their influence evaporating like morning mist. They would spend years rebuilding what they'd lost in a single night, always looking over their shoulders, always remembering the cost of underestimating what they'd considered beneath their notice. Destiny's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around herself, a gesture that was part exhaustion, part overwhelming emotion. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the confrontation, Evans's violence, the look on Armani's face when he'd realized his world was ending. But more than that, she kept returning to the moment in the car, to Gwan's words. "You saved yourself. I just made sure you had the space to do it." The office door opened behind her with a whisper of hinges. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. She'd begun to recognize the particular quality of silence that accompanied his presence, the way the air seemed to sharpen and focus. Gwan crossed the room with those measured steps she'd come to expect, neither hurried nor hesitant. He stopped a few feet behind her, close enough that she could sense his warmth, distant enough to give her space to breathe. "You haven't slept," he observed, his voice carrying none of the hardness it had held at the estate. Here, in the privacy of his office with the city spreading out before them, he allowed himself to sound almost gentle. "Neither have you." Destiny's reflection in the glass showed her looking older somehow, more solid, as though the events of the night had added weight to her existence rather than diminishing it. A pause stretched between them, comfortable in its silence. Below, Seoul awakened delivery trucks navigating narrow streets, early commuters boarding trains, the city's vast machinery grinding into motion. So many lives being lived, so many stories intersecting and diverging, and somewhere in that complexity, she was finding room for her own narrative. "I keep thinking about what you said." Destiny turned from the window finally, meeting his gaze across the space that separated them. His expression was unreadable as always, but she was learning to see past the careful control, to notice the subtle shifts that betrayed deeper currents. In the car, about saving myself. Gwan remained still, waiting. He was good at that, at giving people room to find their own words, their own truths. "You were right." She took a breath, steadying herself against the magnitude of what she was about to acknowledge. About survival, about endurance, about... Her voice caught, emotion threatening to overwhelm the carefully constructed composure she'd maintained through the long night. "About seeing me." She moved closer, each step a conscious decision, until only a few feet separated them. Her hands were still trembling, but she didn't hide it, didn't try to pretend she was anything other than what she was, someone standing on the edge of transformation, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "It's not just about survival," Destiny continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "That's what I realized tonight. Watching you face Armani, watching his world fall apart, it wasn't about revenge or power, or any of the things I thought mattered in your world." She paused, searching for words adequate to the feeling expanding in her chest. "It was about choosing, about deciding what kind of person I want to be, what kind of life I want to live." Gwan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something warming in his eyes that might have been pride or recognition or something more complex than either. "I choose this," Destiny said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff, like free fall and flight combined. "I choose us." The declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that terrified her even as they felt utterly right. This wasn't just about accepting his protection or acknowledging the attraction that had been building between them like static electricity. It was about claiming agency, about refusing to be a piece moved around someone else's board. Gwan moved then, closing the distance she'd left between them with 2 deliberate steps. When he spoke, his voice was soft, filled with a quiet triumph that had nothing to do with victory over Armani, and everything to do with the woman standing before him. "I told you." His hand lifted, hovering near her face, waiting for permission she gave with the slightest nod. His fingers traced the line of her jaw, gentle despite the violence those same hands had wielded hours ago. "I see you. Not the maid, but you, the woman who chooses to be free." The words released something in Destiny that she hadn't realized she'd been holding some final barrier between who she'd been and who she was becoming. Tears pricked her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she let herself lean into his touch, accepting the tenderness he offered with the same deliberation with which she'd accepted everything else. "What happens now?" she asked, because the future stretched out before them uncertain and vast, full of possibilities that both thrilled and terrified her. Gwan's other hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with the comfortable ease of a gesture they'd performed 1,000 times rather than just once, days ago in this very room. "Now we build something new, not built on fear or ownership or any of the structures that made men like Armani possible." His thumb traced circles against her palm, grounding and electric. "We build something chosen, something equal." The promise in those words felt radical, revolutionary even. In a world where power flowed through violence and control, where people like her were meant to remain invisible and inconsequential, the idea of partnership, real partnership, seemed almost impossible to imagine. But looking at Gwan, seeing the certainty in his expression, Destiny found herself believing it might be possible after all. "There will be others," she said, because she wasn't naive enough to think Armani's defeat ended all threats. "Others like him, who will see me as a weakness to exploit, a way to get to you." Gwan's smile was sharp, predatory, and somehow reassuring in its fierce protectiveness. Let them try. His voice dropped lower, taking on an edge that reminded her of the man who'd stood calm in the center of chaos, unshaken while the world erupted around him. Together, we'll make them remember who they crossed. The words should have frightened her, the casual promise of violence, the willingness to meet threats with overwhelming force. But instead, Destiny felt something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. Not bloodlust, but determination. The recognition that she was no longer someone who waited passively for others to decide her fate. She was someone who fought back. Someone who chose. Let's make sure they do, she said, and felt a smile genuine, unfamiliar, transformative spread across her face. They stood together as dawn fully broke over Seoul, the city blazing into life beneath them. The office, which had felt like a throne room and a cage in equal measure, became something else entirely, a beginning point, a place where two people had found each other across impossible distances and decided to forge something new. Gwan pulled her closer, his arms encircling her with a sureness that spoke of promises made and kept. Destiny let herself sink into the embrace, feeling safe in a way she'd never experienced before. Not the safety of invisibility or submission, but the safety of being fully seen and choosing to be vulnerable anyway. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, the words inadequate but necessary. "For seeing me, for giving me the space to save myself." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Thank you for choosing," he replied, his voice resonating through both their bodies. "For being brave enough to claim what you deserve." Below them, Seoul hummed with possibility. Above them, the sky stretched endless and blue. And between them, in the space they'd carved out through violence and trust and the radical act of choosing each other, something entirely new was being born. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue, but a partnership forged in fire and sealed with choice. Destiny pulled back slightly, meeting Gwan's gaze with eyes that held no more uncertainty, no more doubt. "What's next?" she asked, and the question was both practical and profound. Gwan's expression turned thoughtful, calculating. "We consolidate. Make sure Armani's allies know the cost of standing against us. Build alliances with those who understand that power can be wielded without cruelty." He paused, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "And we give you the space to decide who you want to become, now that you have the freedom to choose." The answer satisfied something deep within her, the recognition that her liberation wasn't an ending but a beginning, that choosing him didn't mean losing herself, but rather creating room for both of them to exist fully. "I want to learn," she said suddenly, the desire crystallizing as she spoke. "Everything you know about this world, about how power works, about how to protect what matters." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "I don't want to be just the woman you protect. I want to be the woman who stands beside you, who fights when fighting is necessary, and builds when building is possible." Gwan's expression transformed, pride and something deeper, affection, perhaps, or the beginning of love warming his features. "Then that's what we'll do," he said simply. "Together." The word carried the weight of covenant, of promises made between equals. Destiny felt it settle over her like armor and wings combined, protection and possibility, safety and the freedom to fly. They turned together to face the windows, watching Seoul awaken beneath them. Somewhere in those streets, Armani was waking to a diminished world. Somewhere, others were plotting and scheming, building their own empires on foundations of sand. But here, in this office where everything had changed, two people stood together and chose each other, chose partnership over possession, chose trust over control, chose to build something new from the ashes of what had been. And in that choice, they found freedom. So, they chose each other. Not rescue, not possession. Choice. If that hit you somewhere deep, if you felt that final embrace as more than just romance, but as revolution, I need you to subscribe. Because stories like this, where power shifts and invisible people become unforgettable, where trust is earned and freedom is claimed, they matter. Drop a comment. What would you choose? Safety or freedom? Survival or living? And tell me where you're watching from, because every view, every subscription, every comment is you choosing to say these stories deserve space in the world. Let's make sure they get it. Together.